Dear viewers, you have already become familiar with an overview of the philosophy of social science. At this juncture, it would be a good idea for you to focus and concentrate on specific issues and modes of inquiry. In this unit, we are going to discuss positivism, a method of inquiry that sought to give immense cognitive prestige to the discipline and wanted to convince its adherents that sociology too could be a science and follow the scientific methodological principles of empirical observation, deductive reasoning and formulation of laws or universal generalizations. As a matter of fact, this self-perception of sociology as a science sought to serve the following purposes. It separated sociology as an empirical science from humanities and philosophy. It gave professional identity to sociologists who ought to overcome limiting identities emanating from caste, class and gender and think in a more objective, rational or universal fashion. The knowledge it would acquire would help us reconstruct our society and create a better world. Though positivism became a powerful sociological method, it has critics. We shall also see how positivism has now lost much of its appeal. Features of positivism. We will now look at the features of positivism that can be characterized as follows. It believes in unity of method. Sociology is not different from natural sciences as far as the method of inquiry is concerned. It celebrates objectivity and value neutrality. It therefore separates the knower from the known, subjectivity from objectivity and fact from value. Sociology is not common sense. It rests on explanatory principles which give universal character to the discipline. Sociology is a formal and organized body of knowledge characterized by specialized skills and techno-scientific vocabulary. Sociology can strive for abstraction and generalization. Human experience can be explained through law-like generalizations. The scientific knowledge of society can be used for social engineering. Origin of positivism. Herein lies an important question. Why did positivism grow at the certain juncture of history and establish itself as a leading voice in the discipline? You already know how modern science was evolving, arousing immense optimism and becoming hegemonic. The scientific thinking of emanating from Bacon, Descartes and Newton and scientific inventions and discoveries were altering the cultural or intellectual landscape of Europe. Eventually, the Enlightenment in the 18th century, as you have already learnt, was a turning point. It meant celebrating a new age of reason, objectivity and criticality. It was like coming out of medieval order, religious influences and asserting that scientific thinking would enable us to create a better world. It was difficult to escape the influence of the age. It was difficult not to be influenced by the spectacular success story of science. Science became knowledge itself, real, objective and foundational. And survive in such a milieu was to accept the assumption was that the identity of sociology as true knowledge could not be established without adopting the method of natural sciences. There was yet another important factor. The new age characterized by industrial revolution, expanding trade and commerce and emergent bourgeois altered power relations in the West. It was the time that witnessed the assertion of new elite, technologists, scientists and capitalists. They saw immense possibilities in science and were strong adherents of positivistic scientific culture and mode of inquiry. Yes, there were dissenting voices, say the voices emanating from Romanticism that critiqued the worship of science and reason and pleaded for imagination, subjectivity and creativity. But then, the language of science was irresistible. The politico-economic establishment was sustaining it. Science was going to stay and positivism was its inevitable consequence. The entire phenomenon can be understood better if you reflect on the self-perception of science. For instance, it is argued that science is a radical departure from common sense. Well, common sense may not necessarily be false, but common sense, unlike science, is seldom accompanied by a search for systematic explanation. The explanations derive from solid factual evidence. For instance, before the advent of modern science, people knew the function of the wheel, but it was only modern science that provided us with an explanatory principle like the frictional force to make the sense of the operation of wheels. Likewise, the principles formulated by Newton could explain innumerable facts, the behavior of tides, the paths of projectiles, and moon's motion. It is also argued that unlike the interminacy of common sense, the language of science is more specific, focused, and pointed. It abhors all sorts of vagueness. Even though the poets speak about infinite stars, it would be argued astronomers are interested in calculating and measuring their exact number. Furthermore, science, unlike common sense, is distant, detached, and abstract exercise, whereas common sense has an intimate relationship with our everyday world. Science is essentially neutral. You may enjoy the color of sunset, but then the electromagnetic theory, which provides a systematic account of optical phenomena, retains its remoteness and abstraction. In fact, science deliberately neglects the immediate values of things. That is why it is argued that science is primarily critical in spirit. Whereas common sense tends to take things for granted, science problematizes even our most cherished beliefs. What distinguishes science is its critical spirit, its insistence on empirical evidence. The difference between cognitive claims of science and common sense, which stems from the fact that former are the products of scientific method, does not connote that former are invariably true. It does not follow that while common sense beliefs are usually accepted without a critical evaluation of the evidence available, the evidence for conclusion of science conforms to standards that are significant proportion of conclusions supported by similar structured evidence remains in good agreement with additional factual data when fresh data are obtained. Many are articulating this supremacy of science as a more reliable, objective, and critical knowledge. In self-perception of science, you see a positive story, a positive affirmation of virtues of science, its ability to construct objective, empirical, critical, and universal knowledge which is free from personal or political bias and prejudice, in a way, it is heroic notion of science. Positivism was also an affirmation of this positive or heroic science. It was positive because it meant certainties of science, and it is also meant a positive attitude towards life using science for improving our lot. Early Positivism. Positivism, as you can gather, emerged out of a situation in which there was tremendous optimism centered on cognitive power of science. You also know that modern sociology evolved at a specific juncture of European history when the entire social landscape altered because of scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and French Revolution. It was indeed a new age, and sociology as a formal academic discipline was trying to make sense of it. In fact, the roots of early positivism could be found in the first half of the 19th century in France. Imagine the state of post-revolutionary France. There was a significant change in domain of knowledge. The separation of science and philosophy became inevitable. New scientific journals started appearing, and a close link between science and industry was established. It was felt that there was a single scientific method applicable to all fields of study. Possibly, Saint Simon, one of the early sociologists, articulated this aspiration rather sharply. A scientist, he felt, is one who predicts, and it is the power of prediction that gives him power. He therefore pleaded strongly for extending the scientific outlook from physical sciences to the study of human beings. It was an urge to create some kind of social physics so that sociology could accomplish its historical mission, completing the unfinished agenda of industrial revolution. Saint Simon. Indeed, this close affinity with science gave birth to Positivism. Auguste Comte, the founder of modern sociology, established Positivism as the most cherished doctrine of sociology. Yet, like Saint Simon, Comte too was witnessing the revolutionary transformation. In a way, he saw the contradiction between two social forces, theological or military and scientific or industrial. Like visionary, he felt that this contradiction could be resolved only by triumph of the scientific or industrial society. Scientists, as he saw all around, were replacing theologians as moral guardians of new social order, and industrialists were replacing the warriors. Not solely that, Comte too shared the Enlightenment assertion that it was possible for science to grasp the workings of the world. He believed that positivist or scientific knowledge was inevitable outcome of progressive growth of the individual mind as well as historical development of human knowledge. From 1871 to 1823, Comte and Saint Simon collaborated so closely that it was almost impossible to distinguish the contributions of the two. It was at this juncture that they spoke of social physics and the need to discover natural and immutable laws of progress which are necessary as law of gravity. But then they separated, and eventually Comte emerged as an independent scholar. It was during 1830 to 1892 that he published 6 volumes of Course of Positive Philosophy, and finally during 1851 to 1854 he published 4 volumes of System of Positive Politics. What made Comte immortal in the discipline was his celebrated law of 3 stages. First, he spoke of theological stage, a stage in which the mind explains phenomena or mundane occurrences by ascribing them to unfathomable gods. The fact is that without some guide, one cannot begin to make systematic observations. Science in their infancy could not escape the questions relating to essences of phenomena and their ultimate origins, to which theological answers are most appropriate. Second, he spoke of metaphysical stage in which abstract forces, powers of essences rather than spiritual forces are considered responsible for worldly affairs. And finally, as Comte argued, there was a positive or scientific stage in which we abandon the search for ultimate origins, purposes or abstract forces and become more concrete and focused. We observe the relations between phenomena and arrive at laws because of aim of positive philosophy to consider all phenomena as subject to invariable natural law. An example to understand the deeper meaning of Comte's law of 3 stages. Let us take a simple illustration to comprehend the deeper meaning of these 3 stages of knowledge. Imagine fire as a phenomenon. It is possible to explain it, as the Vedic hymns suggest, as a manifestation of powerful deity called Agni. Now, Comte would have argued that explaining fire as a manifestation of Agni is a theological explanation. But suppose one goes beyond these Vedic rituals and enters a higher stage of contemplative or abstract thought and sees fire as something symbolizing human beings' quest for truth and purity, burning all egoistic passions and impulses. Yes, Comte would have argued that it is metaphysical explanation. But then, if you argue that fire is just a physico-chemical phenomenon that can be explained in the form of natural law, Comte would have argued, you have finally arrived at the positive stage. In other words, positivist knowledge is empirical and universal, something that is concrete and demonstrable. Here is a piece of knowledge without metaphysical or theological significance. It demystifies the world. So, when you see the rains, you need not explain it as Indra's blessing, nor do you see it as a manifestation of man's poetry to overcome the dryness of his being. Instead, the rains you see in this positivist stage can be explained in terms of scientific principles of heat, cloud formation and water cycle. Not all branches of knowledge, argued Comte, reach the positive state simultaneously. The lower sciences like astronomy, mechanics, chemistry and biology develop faster. These are lower sciences because these are less complex, less dependent on other sciences and their distance from human affairs is far greater. But sociology, being more complex and more near to everyday life, reaches the positive stage quite late. Comte was, however, hopeful that even for sociology, the time had finally arrived. It could now project itself as a positive science, analyze social phenomena and discover the laws governing the relation among them. Sociology for him is the queen of sciences because without the guidance of its law, the discoveries of the lower sciences could not be utilized to their maximum advantage of humanity. There are two kinds of sciences, namely analytic and synthetic. Physics and chemistry can be said to be analytic because they establish laws among isolated phenomena. Biology is synthetic because it is impossible to explain an organ apart from the living creature as a whole. Likewise, according to Comte, sociology is synthetic because everything, be it religion or state, has to be studied in the context of entire society. It is not difficult to draw the implication of positivism. There is no free will in mathematics and physics. Likewise, as Comte thought, there is no free will in sociology. Sociology, Comte believed, could determine what is, what will be and what should be. In other words, social phenomena are subject to strict determinism. Let us understand what it means. Even a child learning elementary mathematics would tell you that 2 plus 2 equals 4. If you and I want it to be different, it cannot be altered. In other words, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is an iron law. Say like the law of gravitation. It prevails irrespective of our subjective states of mind. This is precisely the kind of knowledge positivism is striving for. Suppose as a Marxist, you put forward a sociological law that socialism is inevitable because that is the way history progresses. You are arguing like a positivist and equating Marxism with an invariable natural law like the law of gravitation that exists. No matter what kind of life projects you and I have and what kind of thoughts we cherish. Yet, let us not forget that Comte was also a great moralist. He was deeply concerned about social order and its moral foundation. In fact, he sought to use positivist sociology to reconstruct his society. No wonder, positivist sociology for him would act like religion, of course, a secular religion for humankind. This led Nesbert to comment that positive sociology for Comte is simply medievalism minus Christianity. Look at the state of French society Comte was confronting. True, revolution was turning point, but then it also led to new problems which, as he felt, were quite disturbing. For instance, he could not give his consent to prevalent anarchy leading to exaggerated individualism. It was for him a disease of modern civilization. Nor did he give his consent to those who pleaded for diverse rights. His anxiety was that it would lead to the breakdown of centrality of the family. It would also weaken the community. The moral crisis or the crisis of order was something that must be resolved, and it was his conviction that the new positivist sociological knowledge could fulfill the void and serve the therapeutic function of religion. No wonder he was equally concerned about the social static or restoration of order. In fact, if you think deeply, you would realize that Comte's positivism conveyed the interesting message that science, despite the progressive role it played, was also an integral component of establishment and ideology of order. Consolidation of positivism. Auguste Comte provided the intellectual foundation of positivist sociology, and possibly it was this French tradition that gave birth to one of the most distinguished classical sociologists, Émile Durkheim. Durkheim consolidated and elaborated positivist sociology. In a way, the rules of sociological method that he published in 1895 gave a new momentum to the discipline. The subject matter of sociology, he repeatedly emphasized, is the domain of sociological facts that cannot be comprehended by any other discipline. It is therefore important to know how he defined social facts. You can understand it better through an example from your everyday life. Imagine one fine morning you choose to walk barefoot. Nobody has compelled you to do so. It is your free choice, your own decision. But then imagine one evening you decide to visit a temple and offer your prayers. Before entering the temple, you remove your shoes, wash your hands and walk barefoot. Do you see a qualitative difference in these two experiences? Yes, there is a significant difference. In the second case, you are not really free. Well, you may argue that it is you who have chosen to walk barefoot inside the temple complex, but that is because you have internalized the prevalent practice so well that it looks almost natural and spontaneous. Imagine what would have happened had you tried to enter the temple without removing your shoes. You would have experienced severe constraint and resistance. From the temple authorities to the other devotees, all would object to your act and regard it as an insult to the sacred space. In other words, walking barefoot inside the temple is a fact that exists out there as a thing. It has an independent force and transcends your own will. If you disobey the practice, you would be forced, coerced, isolated or ridiculed. Such facts, according to Durkheim, are called social facts. Everybody eats, drinks and sleeps, but not all such facts can be called social. Then there would be no difference between biological or psychological facts and social facts. In fact, there are some distinctive features of social facts. First, social facts exist outside you. Imagine a tree that you are seeing from your window. It has a reality of its own. Even if you close your eyes and refuse to see it, the tree exists as it is. Likewise, Durkheim explained that when I fulfill my obligations as a brother, husband or citizen, when I execute my contracts, I perform duties which are defined externally to myself and my acts in law and custom. Even if they conform to my sentiments and I feel their reality subjectively, such reality is still objective, for I did not create them. I merely inherited through my education. These facts are indeed different. The currency you use in your economic exchange, the language you speak in the process of communication, the rituals you celebrate as a member of a religious community, all these are social facts. Their existence does not depend on your or my will. As Durkheim put it, here are ways of acting, thinking and feeling that present the noteworthy property of existing outside the individual consciousness. Second, social facts are endowed with coercive power. True, in our everyday life we do not experience this constraint. The reason is that because of habit, socialization and internalization, we tend to experience social facts as natural and spontaneous. But then, as Durkheim reminded, if I do not submit to the conventions of my society, If in my dress I do not conform to the customs observed in my country and in my class, I ridicule, I provoke, the social isolation in which I am kept produce, although in attenuated form, the same effects as a punishment in strict sense of the word. Third, social facts as things need to be distinguished from their individual manifestations. In fact, Durkheim held that social facts acquire a body, a tangible form, and constitute a reality in their own right, quite distinct from the individual facts which produce it. For example, codified legal and moral rules or articles of faith wherein religious groups condense their beliefs, none of these can be found entirely reproduced in the applications made of them by individuals. Yet, sociologically, it is important to categorize their tangible, crystallized aspects as social facts, not their individual manifestations. The meaning of social in social facts is therefore clear. As Durkheim stated, their source is not in the individual. Their substratum can be no other than society, either the political society as a whole or someone of the partial group it includes, such as religious denominations, political, literary and occupational associations. To sum up, you can borrow Durkheim's own words and conclude, a social fact is every way of acting, fixed or not, capable of exercising on individual and external constraint, or again, every way of acting which is general throughout a given society, while at the same time existing in its own right independent of its individual manifestations. You can understand Durkheim's scientific sociology better if you look at the rules he prescribed for studying social facts. One such rule which has often been talked about is that it is absolutely necessary to observe social facts as things. What does it mean? A thing is a thing because it cannot be altered even if you and I want it. It is in the sense that external objects like a tree, a table and a chair exist as it is. It is in this sense that external objects like a tree, a table and a chair exist as things. If you wish to observe a thing as it is, you should not confuse it with your own ideas and sentiments. A tree needs to be seen as a tree, even if you hate trees. In other words, almost like Francis Bacon, Durkheim would argue that our ideas and sentiments or idols should not prevent us